This is rust. And if you've ever worked on a car, then you know as well as I do that rust is the biggest pain in the butt of just about anything that you can come across in a car. It eats away body panels, it destroys bolts, it makes everything weak, and on top of all of that, it has the audacity to be ugly. Now unfortunately, there's only one real good way to get rid of rust, and that's to cut it out completely. Sure, they make chemicals and abrasives that can get rid of rust, but the one true solution to get rid of it is just to replace it. Now, rust is nothing new to me. I've been seeing this on my car, eating it away slowly for the better part of the last 2.5 years. And frankly, I'm sick of it. So today, we're making some serious progress on tearing out this old rust and replacing it with some beautiful new metal. Now in the last video, I replaced the rear piece of the quarter panel that had been completely rotted through. And inside of it, I found a bunch of knickknacks and dirt that were stuck inside the quarter panel from many years ago. But today, we've got something much more complicated. The front half of the quarter panel that also includes some incredibly complex panels on the inside of the door panel. Now this is the first time we're running into a challenge like this, where we have to actually take into account another part of the car moving and interacting with this body panel to make sure that it fits properly. And not only does it have to fit properly, but I'm going to have to build a brand new panel with almost no metal to reference the original structure of this, and basically hope for the best. Now, would this whole process be a whole lot easier if I had just bought an entire new quarter panel? Yeah, absolutely. But we don't do things easy here, because we don't like to do things expensive here. And we all know that by putting in hard work, we can save ourselves a couple extra dollars here and make sure that this car still turns out beautiful. So with that being said, let's put all my welding and metalwork skills to the test by replacing the most complicated panel on this car yet. We're going to start this one off similar to the other panels by cutting into about a 1/2 inch layer of Bondo that is scraped across what seems to be the entire lower half of this car. Even though the metal up on the upper half seems to be fine, it looks like the lower half was put together by a child in kindergarten. So stripping all this Bondo off has become uncomfortably familiar to me. As you can see, I am literally chiseling off the Bondo from this panel. There's almost no actual metal left here, and what is left is basically paper thin and covered in rust. Unsurprisingly, this panel has taken a heck of a beating over the years and has definitely been touched multiple times, and not in a good way. It's been made very clear to me that the last owners of this vehicle, or whoever maintained it for them, definitely did not actually care about this car. It was originally used as a dirt racing vehicle, which makes a little bit of sense given how much mud and dirt is caked inside of this thing, but you would think that something that is used as a race car might be loved a little bit more than this. Now, as I was pulling this quarter panel apart, I noticed there was another hole in the door jamb. And this is something that I was really hoping wasn't going to be an issue, but a large chunk of this door jamb was actually completely rotted out. It had spread all the way from the quarter panel all the way up here, probably a good 7 or 8 inches. So I cut into it and started peeling the panel off, and I was unbelievably surprised that laying behind this panel was spray-in insulation foam that you would use in like door jambs or door frames in actual home construction. Now this is the second compound that I've found from home construction in this car, and I'm starting to think that maybe somebody just lived in the car and didn't know any better. No, but in all seriousness, this is actually a horrible thing to put in a car like this, because if there is moisture that gets in there, it can get trapped in that foam and just expedite the rotting process from that rust. Now this is all of the dust and the panels that I pulled out of here, and we're left with a giant gaping hole that needs to be filled, much larger than the panel that I have to replace it with. So first and foremost, I obviously had to get all of that spray foam insulation out of there. Now initially, I actually thought when I first pulled this panel off that it might have been something that GM put in their stock, because modern cars do sometimes have spray foam on the inside of certain panels, and I thought maybe GM was just very futuristic with their old cars and somehow knew that spray foam insulation was going to become a thing that should be used. In reality, this is obviously something that is done aftermarket, and I don't think it serves any benefit or any sort of positive for this car, so I am going to tear all of this spray foam out to the best of my ability. Now that we've got that disaster out of the way, we are still left with this massive gaping hole that we need to fill. And as you can see, not only do we have the quarter panel to replace, but we have a bunch of parts of the inner door jamb to replace as well.
Well, I've got just about as much material removed as I'm comfortable with at this point, because I'm going to have to use what is currently left here to make some replacement patch panels to reform the structure of this inner panel here, this inner panel here, and then obviously getting the patch panel on. All of this spray foam that was inside here, I actually at first thought might be some sort of insulation from the factory, maybe to keep water out of the rockers or something, but I'm realizing that I don't think that they're supposed to be in there at all, and this is just some very creative aftermarket work from the previous owners. Now, this is definitely obviously not the best case scenario. I was kind of hoping that I would peel this panel open and there wouldn't be too much damage back here, but as per pretty much everything that I've opened up on this car, there is a lot of work to get done here. I have to patch this whole panel right through here. There's going to be a curved piece that comes up through here for this panel. I obviously have to patch this inner structure here. I have to patch this part of the inner structure for the wheel well, and then back over here in this corner, there's still a little hole that needs to be patched in as well. Now, during that process, we also found some massive chunks of Bondo. This is not backed by metal at all. This is just straight plastic. This is completely solid Bondo. But what I found interesting is on some of these thicker sections, you can see from the side that this is all Bondo, but when you look from the front, you can see purple and then also the original GM blue that was on this car, which means that there was Bondo on this chunk of the panel from the factory. Now, I know that GM was not exactly known for having the best body panels and gaps and bodywork from the factory, but having that much Bondo from the factory is a little bit concerning.
So with everything prepared, it was time to start patching in the new panels. So we started with the easiest one, which was the part of the door jamb that was completely square and flat. And that was just an easy rectangle of metal to patch in. And after a little bit of welding and a lot of grinding, it actually looked pretty decent. Then it was time to start repairing the inner structure of the quarter panel. This is one of the most crucial parts of this build, because without structure, you have no structure. Yeah, no structure. It'll just be floppy pieces of metal. And we don't want floppy pieces of metal. We want a solid, stable side of the car. So we need to make sure that this inner structure is repaired properly. We're using the cardboard, we're using the hammer, we're shaping metal, we're getting it done. And honestly, every single time I do this, it just gets a little bit easier. And thankfully, these panels don't need to be pretty, because they sure aren't. But they are solid, they are stable, and the inner structure of the Camaro is back together. Or at least this part of the quarter panel is. Who knows what waits for us on the other side. And finally, with the inner structure repaired, we're able to put in the replacement skin and get the quarter panel wrapped up. Now mind you, we still have the most complicated part of this left, which is the inside piece of that door jamb. But before I even made it to the door jamb, I was struggling to get this panel welded in. Every single time I would put the spot welds down, they were not penetrating properly and just wouldn't stick the metal together. No matter what I tried to do, I just couldn't get these panels to stick. And eventually, I realized that I just had my welder settings set wrong, and it was 100% user error. Thankfully, the YesWelder DP200, which is what I use for all of my welding needs, is a super advanced welder and allows me to dial those settings in perfectly when I need them. And if you guys are looking to pick up a DP200, they are no longer on pre-order. You can actually go ahead and purchase one off of their Kickstarter, which is linked in the description below. And if you're new to welding and you're looking to get something fresh and something really good for a great price, not only is this a great company, but it also helps me out a ton.
After a ton of fine-tuning, the quarter panel is back on, which means we have the front and the rear quarter panel reattached. Now, there are some small areas that I still need to get some work done on. I cut this part of the panel a little bit too short, so there's a tiny gap here. I actually have to weld in the very bottom of this panel right here to a little piece that's still down in here. And then back here, I still have a little triangle of metal that I need to put in from where I also cut this panel a little bit too short. But I definitely think it's safe to say that this is my absolute best bodywork yet as far as metal welding patch panel stuff goes. I am super, super happy with how this all lined up. And honestly, this just goes to show that the more that you do the work, the better at it that you get. This seam right along here is almost completely flat. I can run my hand over it and it is baby butt smooth. Pretty much all of my plug welds came out really nicely. And this body gap line is going to line up better once the door is properly aligned, because right now you can see there's a big gap up here and there's very little gap down here, which means that the door just kind of needs to shift out a little bit, which when I do this, you can see how it flexes out and it lines up a lot better. I have to do this anyway for it to properly line up with the rocker panel here. So the door just needs a little bit of adjustment and then we will be good to go on the body lines here. But even this little body line right down here lines up perfectly with where the door is. Everything just moves through so seamlessly on this panel. I am so incredibly happy with how this came out. Absolutely worth the work. It was a long day out here in the garage getting this done, but I'm glad we did it. So now that this panel is fully welded in, all we have left to do is this little fill piece right here, which is a fairly complicated part. I don't know how I'm going to make this one yet, but it connects from this edge right here all the way over here to in here, and that's a lot of metal to fill in a very complicated patch, but we'll figure it out and we'll get it done.
Now, before I show you guys the final results of this intense welding and patching job, I want to rewind to where we started to show everybody how far this project has come. Now, I feel like it's super important to also mention that when I first bought this car, it was sold to me as having little to no rust. And obviously, we now know that that was a complete and total lie, because this thing is just absolutely eaten by rust. It may as well have been only half a car when I purchased it. But because it was in such bad condition, it's pushed me every single day that I've worked on it to learn and be better at what I'm doing. And when I first started on this, welding and doing bodywork was one of my biggest fears. I had no idea what I was doing, and I really was nervous about touching a car and potentially ruining it. But time after time of restoring small panel by small panel, I'm building confidence in doing this kind of work, and honestly, I think it's paid off.
Well, against all odds, I've gotten all of the metal work done on the quarter panel of this car before everything started rusting, which means the next part of this process is to encapsulate everything in epoxy primer. Now, the cool part about that is I've not painted a single panel of this car. And even though it's only primer, I think it's gonna be awesome to finally see this thing as one solid color, even if it is just a quarter panel, because it's blue and pink and purple and black and silver all over right now. And it looks like a mishmash of 1,000 pieces. And I think finally getting it painted is gonna make this thing look like it might actually become a car one day. Now, before we go throwing epoxy primer all over the back of this car, there are a couple small things that I need to finish up first. Starting with the final cutting of this metalwork in here along the inner ridge of the panel. I have to cut this little flap out from behind the quarter panel to make sure everything lines up smoothly here. Then I'm gonna degrease the entire quarter panel, including the inside of the door here, and sand everything down as much as I can, practically to bare metal. Once everything's sanded down, then we'll wipe it all down with alcohol, clean everything off, make sure that these panels are absolutely no dirt on them whatsoever, and then and only then will we spray it with epoxy. Now, for this spray, we're going to be using just a single can of epoxy primer in a rattle can. This is a 2-part epoxy primer with the little nub on the bottom that you break, and it combines the 2 chemicals together. The reason that I'm doing this is A, I have these cans sitting around my shop already, and B, this is just a single panel. I'm doing from about here, back here to the tail, and then obviously down to the bottoms of these panels here. So making sure that all of this gets sprayed, I think, is all we're gonna need. 1 can will do just fine. Now, as you might notice, this giant hole here is still existing. And that is because I know that this panel is gonna take me a good long while to get everything together for. It's gonna take me a while to make it. It's gonna take me a while to get it welded in. It is a very complicated piece that I cannot find anywhere online, so I have to make it myself. So I'm leaving this as a hole because I just want to encapsulate all of this metal here that I've just welded in before it starts rusting. Because I am fighting constant humidity here in Florida. It's probably 98, 97% humidity every single day here in Florida, which means that that metal is desperately trying to rust. So with that being said, let's start cutting some metal out, let's get cleaning, and then let's spray.
So off I went, cutting away the final pieces of metal on this quarter panel. I've spent literally weeks working on this, trying to make sure that everything was perfect for the time that we needed to put epoxy on this. And these last couple cuts were the final piece of the puzzle that I needed to get this thing primed. Sometimes when working on a car like this, on a very delicate level, you start to feel almost like a surgeon. And I know that a car is nowhere near a living person or an animal, but dang, it really seems to put some stress on you when you are making these final cuts that mean so much to the overall cosmetic look of the car. But with the final 2 cuts made, it was time to start degreasing and cleaning the panel off. While I was degreasing it, I realized that there was probably a little bit more of this paint that I could sand down. So I got my surface conditioner out and started really sanding down all of these panels, especially those EDP coated panels that were replacement patches. Then I brought out my DA and sanded even more to get a more even scratch on everything, and went back and forth with more degreasing and more cleaning and more degreasing, more cleaning, and over and over and over, and repeating this process until all of that loose paint and gunk was off of the car.
All right, we got everything degreased, alcoholed, cleaned up. There is not a speck of dirt left on this, as bad as it honestly looks. This is completely clean now. Now, I'm gonna trash bag the brake caliper and everything down here so we don't get epoxy primer on that. Everything else, I don't really care about anything getting primer on it because, well, frankly, it's all being replaced anyway. Now, before I spray everything, I need to get a lot of this tucked away so my tools don't get sprayed because I'd rather those not be covered in primer. But honestly, I'm not too worried. We're spraying from right about here in the door panel, all the way up the interior, all of this, a little bit down the back, and in the arch. So now we're gonna get masked up. I'm gonna get a towel to kind of block some of these tools so they don't get primed. And then I finally get to see what one panel of this car looks like, put back together and properly primed.
This was it. The big moment. The biggest cosmetic change in this car's lifetime was about to happen. From the day that I first picked this car up, it was an amalgamation of different colors and paints and spray paint, and nothing had ever really been done properly on it. And this feels like the first step of really bringing it back to life. Even though I've been working on this thing for 2.5 years now, these cosmetic changes always seem to hit so much harder than mechanical changes. Sure, it can drive now, and the engine works, and it runs, and it sounds awesome. But seeing it transform like this is something completely different. Colors and the style of a car are what give it its personality, and it's a direct reflection of the personality of the person who drives it, which makes this all the more important to have perfect. Because I want this car not only to represent me and the hard work that I've put into it, but I want it to represent the ability to do something at this scale from starting at zero, having no knowledge of working on cars at all, and being able to bring this thing back to life in a way that is truly stunning. But after just 3 coats of epoxy primer, this is how the car is looking.
Well, it's all epoxied and it should have probably taken a little bit more than 1 can, but I don't want to load up a whole nother can and get it mixed up and just have it go to waste fixing up these little tiger stripes. And I think what's on it right now is enough to keep the metal from rusting even with this awful humidity. And honestly, having it all one color is exactly the effect that I wanted. It finally is starting to look like a real vehicle. Now I'm gonna rewind really quickly and explain why we do epoxy primer before anything else, even though the metal doesn't look great right now. The steps that I'm following are directly out of the handbook of my good friend Jack Builds It. And what he recommended was stripping down as much of the old paint as I possibly could, getting all the metal work done, then degreasing alcohol, cleaning the whole panel, which is what we did, then a layer of epoxy primer on the whole thing, and after it's epoxied, go ahead and do the body work over the epoxy. Now, epoxy will take a couple days to fully cure and get everything ready for body work, which is not a problem for me because I'm not anywhere near starting the body work, which means this is going to create basically a hard shell around all of that metal and keep it protected until I'm ready to start doing Bondo and sanding and filler primer and all of the other stuff that's gonna make this look absolutely gorgeous. And apparently the reason that you do Bondo over epoxy primer is actually a very highly debated thing. Some people want to do Bondo directly over metal, some people want to do the epoxy primer first. It's a very split decision on what you should do. But it seems like this is the safest bet for me purely because of how bad the humidity is here. So this will buy me some time before I have to jump into bodywork, which is good because I have a whole lot of work left on this car, and I just wanted to make sure that the work that I had done was not ruined. Now, with that being said, I'm gonna spend the next couple weeks in the garage here doing more and more metal work. I gotta do exactly what I did on this side. On the other side, we've got one panel on the rear bumper that needs to be done. We've gotta get the roof put back on here. We gotta get the A-pillars put back on here. And behind the car on the other side that you guys can't see, I've got two really big surprises for this project. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys in the next one. See ya.